The howling wind tore through the plains of Nebraska Territory, 1858, as snow piled high against the small cabin's walls. Inside, Sarah Mitchell clutched her 2-week-old twins to her chest, their tiny bodies the only warmth she had left in this world. 3 days ago, she had buried her husband Thomas under the frozen ground, victim to a rattlesnake bite that festered despite her desperate attempts to save him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fireplace embers were dying. Food supplies dwindled to nearly nothing. The nearest settlement was 30 miles away, an impossible journey in this merciless blizzard, especially with newborns. As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, Sarah faced the terrifying reality that she and her children might not survive the night. What Sarah couldn't know was that 15 miles away, a Comanche hunter named Eagle Eye searched for shelter from the same storm that threatened to claim her life. Their worlds, so different yet equally brutal, were about to collide in ways that would challenge everything they believed about survival, trust, and the meaning of family on the untamed frontier. Sarah Mitchell had never wanted to leave Philadelphia. The daughter of a bookbinder, she had grown up surrounded by stories of adventure, but had never yearned for one herself. She preferred the predictable rhythms of city life, church on Sundays, shopping at the market on Wednesdays, evening gatherings, where neighbors discussed politics and literature over tea. It was at one such gathering that she met Thomas Mitchell, a carpenter with dreams far bigger than his modest workshop. "There's land in the West, Sarah," he'd tell her during their courtship, eyes bright with possibility. "Free land for anyone, willing to claim it. We could build something of our own, something that would last generations." She had married him knowing his heart belonged to horizons she couldn't see. For 3 years, she convinced him that Philadelphia offered everything they needed. And when she announced she was with child, she thought perhaps the matter was settled. Thomas would stay, become a father, grow his carpentry business, and they would raise their family in the comfort of civilization. But the news only intensified his resolve. "I won't have my children growing up in these cramped quarters," he insisted, gesturing to their small apartment above his workshop. "They deserve open skies, fresh air, and land of their own someday." When the doctor later announced she was carrying twins, Thomas took it as divine confirmation. 2 weeks later, he sold his business, and Sarah found herself on a westbound train, 6 months pregnant and sick, with both morning sickness and dread. The Nebraska Territory had been opened to settlement just 4 years prior. The Homestead Act promised 160 acres to any settler who could improve the land and live on it for 5 years. It was the opportunity Thomas had been waiting for, but the reality proved harsher than the dream. They arrived in late summer. The land agent in Fort Kearny directed them to an unclaimed parcel 30 miles from the nearest settlement of Willow Creek. When they first laid eyes on the endless prairie, Thomas saw potential, but Sarah saw only isolation, miles of swaying grass in every direction, not another soul in sight. "We'll build here," Thomas had declared, driving a stake into the ground. "By this creek, water for crops, trees for timber, and shelter from the wind." Sarah had nodded, one hand on her swollen belly, trying to imagine raising children in this wilderness. No neighbors to help during childbirth, no doctor within a day's ride, no school, no church. Just emptiness stretching to the horizon, beautiful but terrifying in its vastness. Thomas worked with fevered determination, as if racing against winter's approach. By September, he had constructed a modest one-room cabin with a stone fireplace. By October, he had dug a root cellar, hunted enough game to smoke meat for winter, and traveled to Willow Creek for supplies they couldn't produce themselves: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition. "See," he would say, sweeping his arm across their small homestead. It's coming together. By spring, we'll plant our first crops. In 5 years, you won't recognize this place." Sarah tried to match his enthusiasm, but as her pregnancy advanced and her discomfort grew, she found herself longing for her mother's guidance, for a midwife's experienced hands, for any female companionship in this isolated place. The closest neighbor, a family named Henderson, lived 7 miles away, practically next door by prairie standards, but an impossible distance for regular social calls, especially in her condition. The twins arrived in early December, a week earlier than expected. Thomas rode through the night to fetch Martha Henderson, who had assisted with births before. After 18 hours of labor, Sarah delivered a boy and a girl, Daniel and Emma Mitchell, tiny but healthy, with Thomas's dark hair and Sarah's blue eyes. "They're perfect," Thomas had whispered, cradling them both in his strong arms. Tears streaming down his weathered face. "Everything we've done has been for them." For 2 precious weeks, they existed in a bubble of exhausted joy. Thomas doted on the babies, undertook all household chores, and spoke endlessly of plans for the future. Expansions to the cabin, a proper barn by summer, perhaps neighbors on adjacent parcels next year. Then came the snake. Thomas had been checking their small herd of 4 cattle, ensuring they had access to water despite the early freeze, when the rattlesnake struck. Half hibernating and sluggish, it should have been harmless, but its fangs found Thomas's ankle between his boot and trouser leg. He had made it back to the cabin, tourniquet in place, but the venom spread quickly. Sarah did everything she remembered. From her father's medical books, cut the wound, tried to draw out the poison, applied poultices of herbs she'd gathered during autumn. Nothing worked. The fever took hold, delirium followed, and 3 days later, as a winter storm gathered on the horizon, Thomas Mitchell breathed his last. Sarah buried him herself, the frozen ground unyielding to her desperate digging. She could only manage a shallow grave, marked with a wooden cross Thomas had carved months earlier for whoever might need it. He hadn't imagined it would be his own. The blizzard arrived the next day, trapping Sarah and the twins in the cabin. For 3 days now, snow had piled against the walls, and wind howled through every crack in the logs. The firewood stack dwindled dangerously low. Thomas had planned to cut more before the storms hit, but death had other plans. On this 3rd night, Sarah sat in the rocking chair Thomas had crafted as a surprise. Twins nestled against her chest beneath layers of quilts. The temperature inside the cabin had dropped so low she could see her breath. She had been rationing the firewood, lighting it only to prepare meals and warm milk for the babies. Now, as darkness fell and the storm intensified, she faced an impossible choice. Use the last logs for warmth tonight, or save them for tomorrow, when the milk would need warming again. "What do I do, Thomas?" she whispered, staring at the cross she'd hung above the fireplace. "I don't know how to save them." The twins slept, blissfully unaware of their precarious situation. Sarah had calculated their chances with cold precision. The nearest help was the Hendersons, 7 miles away, an impossible journey through waist-deep snow with newborns. Their food would last perhaps 2 more weeks if carefully rationed, but without fire they would freeze long before starvation became an issue. A particularly violent gust rattled the cabin's shutters, and little Emma stirred, face scrunching in preparation to cry. Sarah adjusted her position, wincing at the lingering pain from childbirth, and began humming softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung, seemingly in another lifetime. "Hush now, little one," she murmured. "Mama's here." But for how long? The thought ambushed her, bringing fresh tears. If she froze to death tonight, her babies would follow shortly after. If she managed to survive until the storm passed, could she carry them both to the Hendersons without collapsing in the snow? And what if the Hendersons had fled the storm, seeking shelter with relatives in Willow Creek? Sarah was contemplating these grim possibilities when she heard it, a sound distinct from the howling wind and creaking timber. A thump against the cabin's outer wall, too deliberate to be snow falling from the roof or a branch breaking under, the weight of ice. Then came the scraping, methodical, purposeful, along the wall leading to the door. Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat. There were no neighbors close enough to have made the journey in this weather. No passing travelers would be abroad in such a storm. The Indians, then. Thomas had assured her that the local tribes, primarily Pawnee, were peaceful toward settlers who respected boundaries, but he had also mentioned Comanche raiders, who sometimes ventured this far north, especially in winter when food grew scarce. The scraping stopped at the door, followed by a heavy knock that made the wooden planks shudder. Sarah's mind raced through limited options. The cabin had no hiding places. Thomas's rifle hung above the door, loaded as he always kept it, but firing it while holding the twins was impossible. She could pretend no one was home, but the thin wisp of smoke from the chimney betrayed her presence. "Hello?" A man's voice called through the door, barely audible above the wind. "Anybody in there?" Not an Indian, then, unless he spoke English. Sarah remained silent, clutching the twins tighter. "I saw the smoke," the voice continued. "Please, the storm's getting worse." The desperation in his tone stirred something in Sarah. If it was a trap, if opening the door meant death, perhaps it would be quicker than freezing slowly through the night. "I'm coming," she finally called, her voice cracking from disuse. Carefully she laid the twins on the bed, tucking blankets around them. She grabbed Thomas's rifle, its weight unfamiliar in her hands, and approached the door. "I'm armed," she warned, proud of how steady she kept her voice. "State your business." "Just seeking shelter from the storm, ma'am," came the reply. "Been traveling 3 days. Got caught in this blizzard. Saw your chimney smoke. I mean no harm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Sarah hesitated, then lifted the wooden bar securing the door. Cold air rushed in as she pulled it open a crack, rifle raised, blinking against the swirling snow. A figure stood hunched against the storm. Tall, broad-shouldered, face obscured by a fur-lined hood crusted with ice. Not white, she realized immediately. Native American, dressed in a mixture of traditional buckskins and what appeared to be traders' clothing, wool pants, leather boots. A bow and quiver were strapped to his back, a knife at his belt. What caught her attention, however, were his eyes, dark, intelligent, and fixed not on her face but on the rifle barrel pointed at his chest. "You know how to use that?" he asked calmly. Sarah's finger trembled on the trigger. "Well enough," he nodded, making no move toward her. "I understand your caution. I am Eagle Eye of the Comanche people. I've been hunting north of our usual territory." The storm came faster than expected. A baby's cry pierced the tense silence. Daniel, his tiny wail echoing through the cabin. Eagle Eye's eyes widened slightly. "You have a child," he stated, something shifting in his expression. "Children," Sarah corrected automatically. "Twins, 2 weeks old." Another howl of wind nearly knocked her backward. Snow was already accumulating. On the cabin floor, through the partially open door. "I can help," Eagle Eye said suddenly. "I have meat, firewood on my travois." He gestured behind him, where Sarah now noticed a snow-covered wooden frame with bundles secured to it. "And I know this weather, but you must decide quickly." Sarah's mind raced. Thomas had told her stories of settlers and natives helping each other through harsh winters, temporary alliances born of necessity rather than friendship. He had also warned of deception and violence. Which was this? Daniel's cries grew more insistent, joined now by Emma's. The cold air flowing into the cabin would soon threaten their fragile health. "Come in," Sarah decided, stepping back but keeping the rifle raised. "But know that I'll shoot if you make any threatening move." Eagle-Eye inclined his head respectfully and turned back to his travois. Sarah watched tensely as he dragged it closer and began untying bundles. First a deer carcass, already dressed, and partially butchered, then a large bundle of firewood, far more than she had left. Once everything was inside, Sarah quickly closed the door against the howling storm, heart pounding at having a stranger, a Comanche warrior no less, in her home. Eagle-Eye moved with surprising gentleness, carefully placing the firewood beside the fireplace, then standing back, hands visible at his sides. "Your fire is almost dead," he observed. "May I?" Sarah nodded cautiously, keeping the rifle ready. As she edged toward the bed where both twins now cried in earnest, Eagle-Eye knelt by the fireplace, skillfully arranging kindling and larger pieces. With practiced movements, he struck flint against steel, coaxing the embers back to life until flames danced merrily, already warming the small space. "Thank you," Sarah said stiffly, lowering the rifle slightly as she gathered a twin in each arm, rocking them gently. Eagle-Eye remained by the fire, adding logs carefully. "They are very young to be alone in such weather," he said, not looking at her. "Where is their father?" The blunt question pierced Sarah's heart. "Dead," she replied flatly. "Snake. 3 days ago." Eagle-Eye turned then, studying her face with an unreadable expression. "You buried him alone?" Sarah nodded, feeling tears threaten again, had no choice. For a long moment Eagle-Eye said nothing, only nodded solemnly. Then he rose and moved to the deer carcass. "You need food. I will prepare some." "I can," Sarah began. "You should feed the little ones," he interrupted, gesturing to the twins, who had quieted somewhat with the room's increasing warmth, but still fussed restlessly. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. It had been hours since she'd nursed them properly, her own hunger weakening her milk. She settled into the rocking chair, adjusting her clothing to feed them both, while maintaining as much modesty as possible. Eagle-Eye kept his back turned, working with efficient movements as he cut strips of venison and located her cooking pot. He found dried herbs hanging from the rafters, sniffed them thoughtfully, and added several to the pot, along with melted snow from a bucket by the door. "My people say a woman who has recently given birth needs rich broth to restore her strength," he commented, hanging the pot over the fire, "especially one feeding 2 babies." Sarah watched him warily, but his movements remained calm, focused on the task. "Why are you helping us?" Eagle-Eye stirred the broth, considering his answer. "My sister had twins last winter," he said finally. "One died. The other lived because a white doctor from the fort gave her medicine when our healer's remedies failed." He glanced at the babies nursing at Sarah's breast. Life is precious, more precious than old hatreds. The simple statement hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the complex, often violent history between their peoples, and yet a rejection of its inevitability. As the savory scent of venison broth filled the cabin, Emma finished nursing and gazed around with newfound alertness, her tiny features illuminated by the dancing firelight. Her eyes found Eagle-Eye, and she stared with the solemn curiosity of infants. Eagle-Eye noticed and offered a small, gentle smile, the first Sarah had seen from him. "She has your eyes," he observed, "blue like summer sky." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly, "both do." She studied this man who had possibly saved their lives, this warrior from a people she had been taught to fear. "Do you have children?" A shadow crossed his face. "I had a son. He died of the spotted sickness brought by traders 3 winters ago. My wife followed him to the spirit world soon after." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. Eagle-Eye nodded acknowledgement of her sympathy. "The broth is ready," he said, changing the subject as he ladled the steaming liquid into one of her wooden bowls. Sarah adjusted the twins against her shoulder and accepted the bowl with her free hand. The rich aroma, made her stomach clench with hunger she had been ignoring for days. She sipped carefully, the warm broth spreading life through her chilled body. "It's good," she admitted. "Thank you." Eagle Eye served himself a portion and sat cross-legged on the floor, maintaining a respectful distance. Outside, the wind continued its assault on the small cabin, but inside, the temperature had risen to something approaching comfort. "The storm will last another day, maybe two," Eagle Eye said between sips. "When it breaks, what will you do?" The question brought Sarah back to the reality she had been facing before his arrival. "I don't know," she confessed. "The nearest settlement is 30 miles away. The closest neighbor's 7. I can't manage the journey alone with twins, and if you stay—" Sarah glanced around the cabin, at the meager supplies, at Thomas's tools hanging on the wall, at the bed they had shared. "I don't see how we can survive winter, even with your help tonight." Eagle Eye considered this. "My people are camped for winter 70 miles south of here. It would be a difficult journey, but possible with proper preparation." "Your people." Sarah clutched the twins tighter. "You would take us to a Comanche camp?" He met her gaze steadily. "I would take you, somewhere you and your children could survive winter. The alternative is death, is it not?" Before Sarah could respond, Emma began to fuss again, her tiny face contorting. Eagle Eye watched as Sarah shifted positions, trying to comfort the increasingly agitated infant. "May I?" he asked unexpectedly, setting down his bowl and approaching. Slowly, hands open. Sarah hesitated, maternal instinct warring with desperation. Eagle Eye stopped, waiting patiently for her decision. Finally, she extended Emma toward him, still cradling Daniel protectively against her chest. Eagle Eye took the tiny bundle with surprising expertise, supporting Emma's head as he settled her against his broad chest. He began to hum a low, rhythmic melody, unlike anything Sarah had heard before. His large hand patted Emma's back with gentle firmness, and within moments, the baby released a substantial burp and immediately relaxed. "How did you—" "My sister's child," he explained, still patting softly. "I helped while she recovered. Babies are not so different, whether they are Comanche or white." He continued humming, and Emma's eyes began to drift closed, lulled by the deep vibrations of his chest and the rhythmic patting. Sarah watched, transfixed by the sight of her daughter, peaceful in the arms of a man who, by all she had been taught, should be an enemy. "What would happen," she asked carefully, "if I did go to your camp? Would they accept a white woman and her children?" Eagle Eye considered the question with appropriate seriousness. "It would not be simple. There would be those who oppose it. But our chief Black Feather is a wise man who has seen the changing winds. He knows that our people must find new paths to survive." He looked down at Emma, now sleeping soundly against him. "And we have lost many to disease in recent years. Children are sacred to us, no matter their parentage." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the blizzard showed no signs of abating, but here, in this small space carved from the wilderness, something unexpected was taking shape. A fragile trust born of shared vulnerability and human connection that transcended the divisions of their worlds. Sarah looked at the sleeping face of her son, then at her daughter in Eagle Eye's arms, and finally at the man himself. This stranger who had emerged from the storm like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. "Tell me more," she said softly, "about your people." Dawn broke reluctantly over the snow-covered prairie, pale light filtering through the cabin's frosted windows. The blizzard had abated somewhat during the night, though the wind still moaned. Around the eaves, inside, Eagle Eye stoked the fire to full strength, while Sarah changed the twins' cloth diapers on the bed. "The storm pauses," Eagle Eye observed, glancing through a gap in the shutters. "Not over, but resting. Good time to gather more wood." Sarah nodded, pinning Emma's diaper securely. The woodpile around back, but it's probably buried in snow. I will find it, and check your animals. Sarah had almost forgotten the 4 cattle Thomas had purchased at considerable expense. They were sheltered in a lean-to attached to the cabin's northern wall. Not a proper barn, but some protection from the elements. She hadn't been able to check on them since before the worst of the storm hit. "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude in her voice. After Eagle Eye departed with a wooden shovel, Sarah settled the twins in the center of the bed, surrounding them with pillows to prevent rolling. She took the opportunity to wash quickly with melted snow water, change into her cleanest remaining dress, and attempt to bring order to her tangled hair. The simple actions felt restorative, almost defiant against the circumstances that had threatened to overwhelm her just hours ago. Eagle Eye returned 40 minutes later, arms laden with snow-dusted firewood. His expression was grim. "The cattle?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer from his face. "2 live, 2 did not survive the cold." He stacked the wood neatly. "I moved the living ones closer to the cabin wall where snow has not drifted, gave them hay." Sarah absorbed the news with a nod. 2 cattle lost was a significant blow, but 2 surviving was better than none. "Thank you for seeing them." Eagle Eye brushed snow from his buckskins. "I also found tracks, wolf tracks. They were drawn by the dead cattle but could not reach them through the snow. They will return when the storm breaks completely." A chill ran through Sarah that had nothing to do with the temperature. Wolves were a constant threat on the prairie, especially in winter when game grew scarce. Thomas had shot one less than a month ago when it ventured too close to their livestock. "How many?" "A small pack, 5, maybe 6. Eagle Eye removed his outer layer, hanging it by the fire to dry. "They will be hungry, bold." The implication hung in the air. A hungry wolf pack would return for the dead cattle and might not stop. There, the cabin's door was sturdy, but the windows were covered only with oiled paper, the lean-to secured with simple latches. "We should discuss your plans," Eagle Eye said, accepting a cup of coffee Sarah had brewed while he was outside. "The storm will return by nightfall, then continue perhaps another day. After that, decisions must be made." Sarah sat at the small table Thomas had crafted from split logs, cradling her own coffee cup, the twins sleeping peacefully for the moment. "What would you suggest?" Eagle Eye considered, dark eyes thoughtful. 3 paths lie before you. First, remain here alone until spring, hoping supplies last and no harm comes. He glanced toward the window. "With wolves circling and twins to care for, I do not recommend this path." Sarah nodded, having reached the same conclusion herself. "Second, I could help you reach your nearest neighbors, the Henderson family you mentioned. 7 miles is not impossible with proper preparation, even with infants." "And the third option?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "Travel with me to my people's winter camp. It is farther, many days' journey, but I have a travois that could be modified to carry you and the little ones. We would move slowly, carefully, stopping often." Sarah studied the man across from her, this stranger who had appeared like a miracle in the storm, who had possibly saved 3 lives with his arrival. In the firelight, she noticed details she had missed last night. A thin scar running along his jawline, the flecks of grey at his temples, the lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his late 30s. "Why would you do this?" she asked directly. "Risk the journey with us? Risk bringing a white woman and children to your camp? What do you gain?" Eagle Eye's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, and for her directness. "My people believe that when the Creator places someone in your path, there is purpose in the meeting." He set down his cup. 3 winters ago, when sickness took my son and wife, I wandered far from my tribe, seeking death. A white trapper found me half frozen in the snow. He had no reason to help an Indian, especially a Comanche, but he dragged me to his cabin, nursed me back to health, shared his food and shelter for 2 weeks. He touched the scar on his jaw. When I asked him why, he said only, "One life for another. Someone once did the same for me." When we parted, he refused payment or thanks, saying instead that someday I would understand by finding someone else who needed help. Sarah absorbed his words, turning them over in her mind. "And you believe we are that someone? That this is repayment of a debt?" Eagle Eye shook his head. "Not repayment. Continuation. A circle that should not be broken." He leaned forward slightly. "But you must decide for yourself what path to take. I can only offer the choice." Before Sarah could respond, Daniel began to fuss, tiny fists waving in the air. She rose to attend to him, lifting his small body against her shoulder, bouncing gently as Thomas had shown her. Her mind worked through the options as she paced the small cabin. The Hendersons were the safe choice, a white family, God-fearing, settlers like themselves. Martha Henderson had 7 children of her own and had helped with the twins' birth. They would take Sarah in, at least temporarily. But the journey would be perilous, especially if the wolves were as hungry and bold. As Eagle Eye suggested, the Comanche camp was an unknown, potentially hostile territory for a white woman. Yet Eagle Eye himself was evidence that not all encounters between their peoples ended in violence, and he had the knowledge, skills, and equipment to make the journey possible. Staying alone was no choice at all. It would mean certain death, whether from cold, hunger, or predators. "If we went to your people," Sarah said finally, turning to face Eagle Eye, "would we be prisoners? Captives?" The question clearly surprised him. "No, you would be guests, protected by my standing in the tribe. I am not only a hunter, but a member of the council." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You would be free to leave when spring comes, if that is your wish. I would help you reach a settlement safely. And how would your people view such an arrangement? A white woman living among them?" Eagle Eye's expression turned more guarded. "There would be difficulties, suspicion, questions. Some would oppose your presence." His eyes met hers directly. "I will not lie to you. The history between our peoples has much bloodshed, but our chief, Blackfeather, is wise. He has visited the white man's forts, spoken with their leaders. He knows that the future will bring more white settlers, not fewer. He seeks a path where both can survive." Sarah nodded slowly, appreciating his honesty. "I need time to think," she said. "To pray." "Of course." Eagle Eye rose. "I will check the perimeter again, ensure no wolves have approached. The decision is yours to make." After he departed, Sarah sat in the rocking chair with Daniel, her mind tumbling with possibilities and fears. What would Thomas want her to do? He had been pragmatic above all else, focused on survival and protecting his family. He had also been raised with the same stories and prejudices she had, tales of Indian attacks, of women taken captive, of unspeakable violence. But he had also spoken sometimes of trading with Pawnee hunters who passed through the territory, describing them as shrewd but fair. Once he had employed 2 Ottomen to help raise the cabin's walls, paying them with coffee, sugar, and ammunition. "Good workers," he had commented. "Strong and skilled." Never had he mentioned Comanche, however. They ranged farther south, typically, known for their horsemanship and fierce resistance to encroachment on their hunting grounds. What would he think of entrusting his wife and children to a Comanche warrior? Emma began to cry, joining her brother in demanding attention. Sarah lifted her as well, now with a twin on each shoulder, their warm weights both comfort and responsibility. "What should I do?" she whispered, not sure if she was addressing her deceased husband, God, or simply the silent cabin. The door opened, admitting Eagle Eye and a blast of cold air. He stomped snow from his boots, then stilled, seeming to sense the gravity of her thoughts. "The wolves have not yet approached," he reported quietly. "But they will. I found more tracks near the edge of the clearing." Sarah nodded, still swaying, gently with her children. A decision crystallized in her mind, not from divine inspiration or ghostly guidance, but from the simple calculus of survival. "We'll go to the Hendersons first," she said firmly. "If they've weathered the storm and can take us in, we'll stay. If not, or if the journey proves too dangerous to complete, we'll accept your offer to travel to your people's camp." Eagle Eye considered her words, then nodded once. "A sensible plan. We should prepare as soon as the snow pauses." The rest of the day passed in methodical preparation. Eagle Eye reinforced the travois, creating a small enclosed space in the center where the twins could be secured, protected from wind and cold. Sarah packed what supplies she could: diapers, her few remaining baby clothes, Thomas's spare shirt to cut into additional swaddling if needed, the small Bible her mother had given her as a wedding gift, the silver locket containing locks of both her parents' hair. Food was simpler. They would take the remaining deer meat from Eagle Eye's hunt, some dried corn, coffee, and sugar. Sarah turned over her other possessions in her mind, evaluating each for necessity versus weight. The silver serving tray from her grandmother, left behind, Thomas's carpentry tools, too heavy, though it pained her to abandon them. The quilt her mother had sewn for their marriage bed, essential not just for warmth, but for the comfort of something familiar. As predicted, the storm returned with nightfall, even more ferocious than before. Wind shrieked around the cabin, finding every crack and crevice. Snow accumulated in the corners of the room where the chinking between logs had deteriorated. Eagle Eye worked silently to patch these gaps with mud mixed from hearth ashes and melted snow. Sarah nursed the twins by the fire, watching his efficient movements. "How did you learn to do that?" "We build differently than white settlers, but the principles are the same," he replied, packing the mixture into a particularly large gap. "Keep warmth in, cold out." He glanced at her. "Your husband built this. A cabin?" "Yes, Thomas worked as a carpenter before we came west." Eagle Eye nodded appreciatively. "Good joinery, strong walls. Some settlers build quickly, poorly. Their first winter is often their last." He wanted everything perfect before the babies came. Sarah's voice caught. He was so careful about everything. "Except the snake," Eagle Eye observed, not unkindly. "Except the snake," Sarah agreed. The simple acknowledgement was somehow less painful than platitudes about God's plan or Thomas being in a better place, sentiments the Hendersons would surely offer. Well-meaning but hollow in the face of her loss. As night deepened, Eagle Eye insisted Sarah take the bed with the twins while he slept on a buffalo robe near the fire. She was too exhausted to argue, collapsing into dream-filled sleep, interrupted only by the twins' feeding schedule. She woke once to find Eagle Eye already up, adding wood to the fire, his profile outlined against the flames. For a fleeting moment, the strangeness of the situation struck her anew. A Comanche warrior in her cabin, tending her fire, while her children slept peacefully beside her. Had anyone told her a week ago that she would trust such a man with her life, with her children's lives, she would have thought them mad. Yet here they were, thrown together by circumstance and survival, building a fragile alliance that defied everything she had been taught about Indians in her Philadelphia upbringing. Morning arrived with blessed silence. The storm had finally exhausted itself. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small windows, illuminating dancing dust motes and reflecting brilliantly off the snow-covered landscape outside. Eagle Eye opened the door cautiously, surveying the transformed world. "Good traveling weather," he observed. "Cold but clear. We should leave while the sun is high." Sarah fed and changed the twins one last time inside the cabin, then bundled them in every available layer. Their own blankets, wrapped in Thomas's thickest winter coat, then secured inside a deerskin pouch Eagle Eye had fashioned the previous day. Only their tiny faces remained visible, pink-cheeked and alert. "They will stay warm this way," he assured her, demonstrating how the pouch would attach to the travois. "The skins breathe but hold heat. My people carry our infants like this through the coldest winters." "What if they need feeding or changing?" Sarah worried. "We will stop every hour, more often if they cry." He checked the bindings on the travois one final time. "Henderson Place is northwest, yes?" Sarah nodded, taking a last look around the cabin, at the bed where she had birthed her children and lost her husband, at the hearth where Thomas had cooked their meals, at the chair he had carved as a gift for her birthday. She might never see this place again. The realization brought both grief and relief. "We're ready," she said, adjusting her bonnet and the heavy wool coat that had been her last purchase in Philadelphia. Eagle Eye handed her a stout walking stick. "Stay close. Behind me, I will break trail through the deeper snow. If wolves approach, make noise, shout, sing, anything. They fear human voices." The cold hit Sarah like a physical blow as they emerged from the cabin. Despite the bright sunshine, the temperature remained well below freezing, the air crystalline and sharp in her lungs. The snow had drifted against the cabin's southern wall, in a smooth curve nearly 6 feet high, while the northwestern approach lay under a more manageable 2 feet. Eagle Eye moved with surprising grace through the deep snow, pulling the travois behind him. The twins, secured in their deerskin pouch atop the wooden frame, remained blessedly quiet, perhaps lulled by the gentle swaying motion, or simply content in their multiple layers of warmth. Sarah followed in his tracks, grateful for both the walking stick and his wider footprints that made her passage easier. She had insisted on carrying a small pack with essential supplies: water, strips of dried venison, an extra blanket. Eagle Eye had argued that she needed her strength for the journey. Not for burdens, but she had been adamant. "I won't be helpless," she had stated firmly, and he had eventually acquiesced. They moved slowly but steadily, the cabin receding behind them. Sarah deliberately did not look back after the first half-mile, focusing instead on the rhythm of walking, on placing each foot carefully in Eagle Eye's tracks, on the small cloud of her breath in the frigid air. The vastness of the snow-covered prairie stretched in all directions, broken only by occasional stands of trees along creek beds. Without Eagle Eye's woodcraft and knowledge of the terrain, she would have quickly become disoriented in this featureless white expanse. He navigated confidently, occasionally pointing out landmarks visible only to his trained eye, a particular bend in a distant creek, the silhouette of a lightning-struck oak, the subtle rise of land that marked the watershed divide. They stopped, as promised, when the sun reached its zenith, finding shelter in a small copse of cottonwoods. The twins had begun fussing, hungry after the morning's journey. Eagle Eye quickly cleared snow from a fallen log, creating a place for Sarah to sit. While she nursed them one at a time, he kept his back turned, maintaining the same courtesy he had shown in the cabin while scanning the horizon continuously. "Anything?" Sarah asked, adjusting Emma at her breast. "No sign of wolves yet, but the wind carries sounds away from us. They could be near without our knowing." After both twins had fed and been changed, they continued northwest, the afternoon sun casting long blue shadows across the snow. The temperature began to drop as daylight waned, and Sarah found herself struggling to maintain the pace, her legs leaden with exhaustion, her back aching from the unfamiliar exertion. Eagle Eye noticed her flagging strength. "2 more miles," he encouraged. "See that darker line of trees ahead? Henderson Place lies just beyond." Sarah squinted at the horizon, making out the faint smudge he indicated. "How can you be certain? Everything looks the same under snow." "Not to those who know how to look." There was no condescension in his tone, merely statement of fact. "The Trees grow thicker along Beaver Creek. Your neighbor built near its eastern bend for the water and timber. They pressed on, Sarah drawing on reserves of determination she hadn't known she possessed. The twins remained mercifully quiet, exhausted from the day's journey and comfortable in their improvised carrier. The sun touched the horizon behind them, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and rose. With the coming darkness, the temperature plummeted further, and Sarah's toes began to lose feeling despite her thick woolen stockings and leather boots. "Almost there," Eagle Eye said, pointing toward the tree line now clearly visible ahead, perhaps another half-mile. As they approached the small forest that lined Beaver Creek, Eagle Eye suddenly stiffened, raising one hand for silence. Sarah froze, every sense alert. At first she heard nothing beyond the soft whisper of wind through the trees and the pounding of her own heart. Then she caught it, a low growl, followed by another, coming from the forest ahead. "Wolves," Eagle Eye confirmed grimly, slowly removing his bow from his back and nocking an arrow. "They are between us and Henderson Place." Fear clutched at Sarah's throat. How many? Hard to tell. Their sounds echo among the trees. He studied the darkening forest edge. "At least 4. Maybe the same pack I tracked near your cabin." Twins chose that moment to awaken, Daniel's cry piercing the stillness. The growls from the forest immediately intensified, accompanied by movement among the shadows beneath the trees. "They hear the babies," Sarah whispered, horror rising within her. "They smell them." Eagle Eye moved the travois behind him, positioning himself between the precious cargo and the approaching threat. "Make noise," he instructed calmly. "Loud, human noise, and stay behind me." Sarah began to sing, the first thing that came to mind, a hymn from Sunday services in Philadelphia. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Her voice shook initially, then strengthened as she continued, deliberate and clear in the gathering dusk. The wolves hesitated at the edge of the trees, grey shadows with gleaming eyes, lean and hungry. After the long storm, Eagle Eye held his bow at full draw, arrow aimed at the largest wolf, seemingly the pack leader. "Keep singing," he said quietly. "We will back away slowly. There is a clearer approach to the Henderson farm from the north." Sarah continued her hymn, voice rising on each verse as they carefully retreated, Eagle Eye pulling the travois backward through the snow while maintaining his aim at the wolf pack. The wolves followed at a distance, slinking through the deeper shadows, unwilling to attack outright, but equally unwilling to abandon the pursuit. For 20 agonizing minutes, they maintained this tense standoff, gradually circling north through deeper snow. The babies continued to cry intermittently, distressed by the tension they could surely sense from the adults protecting them. Sarah sang every hymn she could remember, voice growing hoarse but determined. "Look," Eagle Eye said suddenly, nodding toward a point beyond her right shoulder. Sarah turned slightly, careful to keep singing, and saw what had caught his attention, a thin column of smoke rising from beyond the northern edge of the forest. The Henderson cabin. Hope surged through her, lending strength to her tired limbs. How far? Close. Perhaps half a mile through those trees. Eagle Eye's arrow remained trained on the wolves, who had drawn slightly closer during their momentary distraction. But we cannot outrun them to reach it. One wolf, bolder than the others, darted forward a few paces, testing their defenses. Eagle Eye's bowstring hummed, and the arrow found its mark in the creature's chest. It fell thrashing in the snow, and the others retreated temporarily, startled by their companion's fate. "They will rush us next time," Eagle Eye warned, already nocking another arrow. "When they do, you must run for the trees. Head straight for the smoke. Do not look back." "I can't leave you," Sarah protested. "You must. The twins cannot defend themselves." His voice remained steady, his eyes never leaving the regrouping wolves. "I will hold them here as long as possible." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We stay together. Find another way." Eagle Eye glanced at her, something like respect flickering in his expression. Before he could respond, a new sound cut through the twilight. Barking, coming from the direction of the smoke. "Dogs," Sarah breathed. "The Hendersons have hunting dogs." The wolves' ears pricked forward, their attention divided between the potential meal before them and the new threat approaching from the trees. The barking grew louder, accompanied now by a man's shouts, and the distinctive crack of a rifle shot fired into the air. Two large hounds burst from the tree line, charging toward the wolf pack with fearless determination. Behind them came a figure. On horseback, James Henderson, rifle raised, firing another warning shot that sent the wolves scattering into the gathering darkness. "Hello, the trail!" Henderson called, approaching cautiously, dogs circling alertly for any remaining threat. "Identify yourselves! James, it's Sarah Mitchell!" she called back, relief making her voice break. "From the South property!" Henderson urged his horse closer, then pulled up short as he registered Eagle Eye's presence. The rifle, which had been lowering, snapped back up. "Stand away from her, Indian!" he barked. "Sarah, are you all right? Has he harmed you?" "No. No, James, he saved us." Sarah moved quickly to stand beside Eagle Eye. "This is Eagle Eye. He found us during the blizzard, helped deliver us here safely. The wolves would have had us if not for him." Henderson remained tense, rifle still aimed. "Sarah, step away. Come here with the little ones." "Not unless he comes too," she insisted, surprising herself with her vehemence. "He deserves your hospitality and thanks, James Henderson, not your suspicion." For a long moment, Henderson remained motionless atop his horse, clearly torn between ingrained distrust and the evidence before him, a white woman defending an Indian who had clearly protected her and her infants through dangerous territory. Finally, he lowered the rifle slightly. "Martha was worried sick when the storm hit, knowing you were alone with the babies and Thomas laid up with that snake bite. We tried to reach you yesterday when the snow let up, but couldn't get through the drifts." "Thomas is dead," Sarah said. Simply, "Buried 3 days ago. Eagle Eye found us nearly frozen in the cabin afterward." Henderson's expression shifted from suspicion to shock, then to a mixture of grief and awkward sympathy. "I'm sorry, Sarah, truly." He glanced at Eagle Eye, then back to Sarah. "Both of you, come on then. Martha's got stew on and the house is warm. We can sort everything else out once you're safe inside." As they followed Henderson and his dogs through the twilight forest toward the glowing windows of the Henderson cabin, Sarah found herself walking beside Eagle Eye rather than behind him for the first time. The travois slid smoothly over the path, broken by Henderson's horse. "Thank you," she said quietly, the simple words inadequate for all she felt. Eagle Eye inclined his head slightly. "The circle continues," he replied. "Now others must decide how to complete it." Ahead lay the Henderson farm, safety, civilization, people of her own kind who would take her in without question. Yet Sarah found herself glancing over her shoulder toward the southern horizon where she had buried her husband, and where, much farther beyond, lay an encampment of people she had been raised to fear. The journey ahead would not be simple for any of them. But as the twins quieted in their warm cocoon and the lights of the Henderson cabin grew closer, Sarah realized that the blizzard had done more than threaten her life. It had blown away certainties she had never thought to question, revealing a path she could not yet see clearly, but felt compelled to explore. "One step at a time," she murmured to herself, following Henderson's broad back through the trees as darkness settled fully over the Nebraska prairie. The Henderson cabin glowed like a sanctuary in the gathering darkness, its windows warm with lamplight, chimney belching smoke that spiraled upward into the star-pricked sky. As they approached, the front door burst open, spilling golden light across the snow. Martha Henderson stood silhouetted in the doorway, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "James, is that—" Her voice caught as she recognized Sarah trudging through the snow, Oh, sweet heaven. Sarah Mitchell, is that really you? Sarah managed a tired smile as they reached the cleared area before the cabin. 5 of the Henderson children crowded the doorway behind their mother, eyes wide with curiosity. Their expressions shifted from excitement to uncertainty as they registered Eagle Eye's presence. "Martha," Sarah called weakly, suddenly aware of how utterly exhausted she was. "We've come a long way." Martha rushed forward, arms outstretched, then faltered briefly upon seeing Eagle Eye up close. To her credit, she recovered quickly, focusing on Sarah and the bundle containing the twins. "Bring those babies inside this instant before they catch their death," she commanded, maternal instinct overriding any misgivings. "James, what in heaven's name—" "Thomas is dead," James interrupted quietly. "Snake got him. This Indian found Sarah and the twins during the blizzard." Martha's hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, embracing Sarah gently. "Come inside, all of you. There'll be time for explanations once you're warm." The interior of the Henderson cabin was a stark contrast to the solitary confines of Sarah's own. Though built in similar fashion, this space hummed with life. Cooking, pots bubbling on the hearth, children's toys scattered across plank floors, the mingled scents of fresh bread and smoked meat. 2 large rooms accommodated the family of 9, with a half-loft above where the older children slept. The Henderson children, ranging from 14-year-old William to 3-year-old Abigail, stared openly at Eagle Eye as he ducked through the doorway, his imposing height requiring him to stoop. Their gazes held mixed fascination and trepidation. "Children, mind your manners," Martha scolded, guiding Sarah to a rocking chair near the fire. "William, take Mr. Henderson's and the Indians' coats. Mary, fetch clean blankets for Mrs. Mitchell and the babies." Eagle Eye remained near the door, alert and watchful, clearly uncomfortable inside the crowded cabin. James hung his rifle on wall pegs, then turned to face their unusual guest. "You can set your weapons there," he said, gesturing to a corner. Eagle Eye considered this for a moment, then slowly removed his bow and quiver, keeping only his knife at his belt. The simple act spoke volumes, a gesture of cautious trust. But not complete surrender. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said formally. His English, Sarah realized, was more precise and deliberate here than it had been when they were alone. Each word chosen with care, his accent more controlled. An awkward silence descended, broken only by Martha's fussing over the twins. Now, unwrapped from their traveling cocoon, Emma yawned hugely, tiny fists stretched overhead, while Daniel blinked owlishly at the new surroundings. "They seem none the worse for their journey," Martha marveled, expert hands checking for fever or other signs of distress. "A miracle, truly." "Not a miracle," Eagle Eye spoke quietly. "Good planning, strong mother." His gaze met Sarah's across the room, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. James cleared his throat. "Well, you're welcome to our table. Tonight," he said to Eagle Eye, clearly struggling with the unfamiliar situation. "We owe you for bringing our neighbors safely to us." "I should go," Eagle Eye replied. "My presence makes your family uncomfortable." "Nonsense," Martha interjected, firmly. "No one goes back into that cold with night fallen and wolves about. You'll eat and sleep here, and that's final." Her tone brooked no argument, the same voice that kept 7 children and 1 husband in line. Even Eagle Eye seemed to recognize the futility of opposition, inclining his head in acceptance. Dinner was a subdued affair, despite the crowded table. James said grace, pointedly including thanks for Sarah and the twins' safe delivery, though avoiding direct mention of Eagle Eye's role. The children ate quietly, stealing glances at their unusual guest. Eagle Eye himself ate sparingly, with perfect manners that Sarah suspected were adopted specifically to ease the Henderson family's discomfort. After the meal, Martha organized sleeping arrangements with brisk efficiency. Sarah and the twins would share the small bedroom normally occupied by the three youngest Henderson children, who would sleep near the hearth for the night. Eagle Eye was offered a pallet in the main room, positioned between the front door and fireplace. Once the children were settled and James had gone out for a final check on the livestock, Martha sat beside Sarah on the edge of the bed. The twins slept peacefully in a wooden cradle that had held each Henderson baby in turn. "Now," Martha said gently, taking Sarah's hands in her own, "tell me everything." Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. The events of the past weeks poured out in a flood of grief and fear. Thomas's death, the desperate days alone, the blizzard's fury, and Eagle Eye's unexpected arrival that had saved their lives. Martha listened without interruption, her weathered face reflecting each emotion as if experiencing it herself. "God works in mysterious ways," she said when Sarah finally fell silent, "sending help from such an unexpected quarter." "He is a good man, Martha," Sarah said earnestly. "Without him we would have frozen or starved." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you, though James will take longer to convince." She squeezed Sarah's hands. "What will you do now? You're welcome to stay. With us until spring, of course." The question Sarah had been avoiding settled heavily between them. "I don't know," she admitted. "The homestead. I can't manage it alone, not with twins, but abandoning it means losing everything Thomas worked for. Perhaps when the weather improves, James could help you return, gather whatever can be salvaged." Martha suggested, "Come spring, there might be a family looking to establish themselves who would pay something for the claim, even if not what it's worth." It was the sensible course, the only sensible course, really. Yet Sarah found herself hesitating, thinking of the third option Eagle Eye had presented. She said nothing of it to Martha, knowing how it would sound to suggest even considering such a possibility. "We'll see what spring brings," she said instead. "For now, I'm just grateful for your hospitality." Martha patted her knee. "Get some rest. Those little ones will be hungry before dawn." After Martha departed, Sarah lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the twins' soft breathing. Beyond the door, she could hear murmured conversation between the Hendersons, their voices too low to distinguish words, but their concerned tones evident. Discussion about her situation, no doubt, and about Eagle Eye. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity as the Henderson household began its daily routine. Sarah emerged from the bedroom to find Eagle Eye already gone from his pallet, though his few belongings remained. James explained through a mouthful of breakfast that their guest had risen before dawn to help with the livestock. "Knows his way around cattle, I'll give him that," James admitted grudgingly. "Noticed right away that our milk cow has an infected teat. Been treating it with some herb poultice he made." Sarah smiled slightly. The admission seemed to pain James, as if acknowledging any skill in Eagle Eye somehow undermined long-held beliefs. After breakfast, Sarah bundled up against the cold and stepped outside, twins secured in a sling Martha had fashioned across her chest. She found Eagle Eye near the small barn, repairing a section of fencing damaged during the storm. He worked methodically, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Good morning," she called, approaching carefully through the trampled snow. Eagle Eye straightened, offering a brief nod. "The little ones are well." "Yes, thanks to you." She adjusted the blanket covering their faces from the cold. "Martha says they show no ill effects from the journey. They are strong, like their mother." He resumed working on the fence rail. Sarah watched him for a moment. "You didn't have to do this," she said, gesturing to the repair work. "A guest should contribute," he replied simply, "and it gives Henderson's oldest boy chance to see different way of securing joints." He nodded toward William, who stood several paces away, observing the technique with poorly disguised interest. Sarah lowered her voice. "The Hendersons have offered to let me stay until spring." Eagle Eye continued working, his expression unchanged. A wise choice. They are good people. And your offer to take us to your camp? She wasn't sure why she was asking, what she expected him to say. His hands stilled briefly. It remains open. His dark eyes met hers. But here you are among your own kind, safer, better for the children. Before Sarah could respond, James Henderson approached from the cabin, his expression troubled. "Riders coming," he announced tersely. 6 men from Willow Creek. Eagle Eye's posture shifted subtly, tension evident in his shoulders. "Friends of yours?" James grimaced. "Neighbors, more like. Probably part of the search party we organized when the storm broke. Word must have spread about Thomas." He glanced uneasily at Eagle Eye. "Some of them, they fought in the Texas conflicts, have strong feelings about Comanche." "I should go," Eagle Eye said, setting down his tools. "No," Sarah intervened sharply. "You've done nothing wrong. This is the Hendersons' property. They decide who stays." James shifted uncomfortably. "That's true enough, but Harlan Pierce leads that group, and he lost family to the Comanche raiders years back. He's not a man who distinguishes between one Indian and another." The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Eagle Eye assessed the situation with calm practicality. "I will remain out of sight until they leave," he decided. "No need to create conflict in your home." "The root cellar," James suggested after a moment's hesitation. "Martha, take Eagle Eye through the back. Sarah, come with me to greet them." The riders entered the Henderson clearing at a trot. 6 men bundled against the cold, rifles prominent across their saddles. Their leader, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, raised a hand in greeting. "James!" "Word reached town, you might. Have found the Mitchell woman and her babies." "Morning, Harlan," James called back, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah in what she recognized as a protective gesture. "News travels fast." "Fastest thing on the frontier," Harlan Pierce replied, dismounting with a grunt. His sharp eyes assessed Sarah and the bundle at her chest. "Mrs. Mitchell, sorry about your husband. Good man Thomas was." Sarah nodded stiffly, acutely aware of Eagle Eye hidden just yards away. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce." The other riders remained, mounted, scanning the property with the habitual vigilance of men accustomed to danger. One pointed toward the travois, still leaning against the barn wall. "That an Indian rig, James?" he called out, suspicion evident in his tone. James stepped forward, hands open at his sides in a placating gesture. "Found it abandoned near the creek. Thought it might be useful for hauling." Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral, heart pounding at the blatant lie. She'd never known James Henderson to be anything but scrupulously honest in all his dealings. Harlan frowned, studying the travois more carefully. "Fresh bindings on those joints." His gaze swept the farmyard. "You seen any Indians? Tracks in? The snow headed this way from the southwest." "Just wolf tracks," James replied evenly. "Pack of them tried to get at Mrs. Mitchell and her babies yesterday. Had to drive them off with the dogs." Another rider, younger than the others, leaned forward, in his saddle. "How exactly did the widow get here from her place, Mr. Henderson?" "That's 7 miles through deep snow with newborns." The question hung in the air, its implicit suspicion unmistakable. Sarah felt a surge of indignation. "I walked," she said firmly, stepping forward. "Wrapped my babies warm and walked every step." "Mr. Calloway, when you have children depending on you for life itself, you find strength you never knew you possessed." Her direct gaze and unflinching tone seemed to discomfit the young man, who sat back in his saddle with a mumbled apology. Harlan Pierce, however, remained unconvinced. "Been tracking a small band of Comanche that crossed the Republican River. During the storm," he said, eyes narrowed. "Unusual to see them this far north in winter. One set of tracks led this direction." "If we see any sign of them, you'll be the first to know," James promised. "Now, can I offer you boys coffee before?" "You ride on. Martha's got a fresh pot on." The invitation, deliberately casual, seemed to ease some of the tension. Two riders declined, citing the need to continue their patrol, but Harlan and the others accepted with alacrity, dismounting and following James toward the cabin. Sarah remained outside momentarily, pretending to adjust the twins' blankets while her mind raced. The situation had grown perilous. If Eagle Eye were discovered, violence would surely follow, and not just against him. The Hendersons would be accused of harboring an enemy, perhaps even of treason against their own kind. Inside, Martha moved with brittle cheer, serving coffee to the visitors while steering conversations away from dangerous topics. Sarah took a seat near the fire, ostensibly to warm the twins, positioning herself where she could watch the trapdoor leading to the root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. "Mrs. Mitchell," Harlan addressed her directly after several minutes of general conversation, "we're organizing a party to return to your homestead when the trail's clear. Retrieve anything of value before scavengers or Indians pick it clean." Sarah nodded gratefully, though the thought of strangers pawing through her and Thomas's possessions disturbed her. "That's very kind." "Not kindness, Mom. Community duty." Harlan sipped his coffee. "You'll stay with the Hendersons until we can arrange. Passage back east to your people, I assume." The question caught Sarah off guard. "I haven't decided my plans yet." Harlan frowned slightly. "No place for a woman alone with infants on the frontier, Mrs. Mitchell. Especially not one whose homestead sits on the edge of Indian territory." "Sarah has time to consider her options," Martha interjected smoothly. "Spring's a long way off yet." The conversation shifted to other topics: damage from the storm, livestock losses across the territory, plans for spring planting. Throughout, Sarah remained tense, aware of every creak in the floorboards, every shadow that might betray Eagle Eye's hiding place. After what seemed an eternity, Harlan Pierce drained his cup and stood. "We'd best be moving on." Still daylight. Left to check the southern properties. The men gathered their gear, offering awkward condolences to Sarah as they departed. At the door, Harlan paused, turning back with a shrewd expression. "Almost forgot. Found something strange out by Miller's Creek. Indian tracks leading to and from a snow cave dug into the bank. Fresh. No more than a day old." His eyes bored into James's. "Thought you should know, neighbor. Keep your rifle loaded." After the riders disappeared down the snow-packed trail, the cabin remained silent for several long moments. Finally, Martha moved to the root cellar door, lifting it quietly. "They're gone," she called softly. "You can come up now." Eagle Eye emerged from the darkness below, ducking to avoid the low ceiling. His expression was grave. "I heard," he said simply. "They track my people." "Why are Comanche so far north?" James asked bluntly. Pierce wasn't wrong about that being unusual. Eagle Eye regarded him steadily. "Hard winter, game scarce in our usual territories. Our chief decided to follow buffalo herds north this season." He paused. "We seek no conflict with settlers, only survival." James scrubbed a hand across his face. "Well, Harlan Pierce seeks conflict whether you want it or not. He's had a blood grudge against all Indians since his sister's family was killed in a raid near San Antonio. Doesn't matter to him which tribe did it." "James," Martha said quietly, "we need to decide what to do. Those men will be back, and next time they might search the property." The gravity of the situation settled over the room. Sarah looked from the Hendersons to Eagle Eye, understanding the impossible position in which they all found themselves. "He should leave," Sarah said reluctantly. Tonight after dark, Eagle Eye nodded in agreement. "I have brought danger to your home. For that I apologize." "Where will you go?" Martha asked, practical as always. "Those men are patrolling all the trails." "I know ways they do not," Eagle Eye replied. "Places they would not think to look." James paced the small confines of the cabin, clearly torn between competing principles. "If Pierce or his men catch you leaving our property, they'll assume we harbored you knowingly. They might not. It could go badly for us." The unspoken implication hung heavily in the air. Frontier justice was swift and often merciless, especially in matters involving perceived Indian sympathizing. "I did not think of this," Eagle Eye acknowledged. "I will find a way to leave that does not connect to your family." Sarah watched this exchange with growing dismay, rocking gently to soothe Emma, who had begun to fuss. A realization was crystallizing in her mind, one that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "I'm going with him," she said suddenly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her in shock. "Sarah, you can't be serious," Martha gasped. "Have you lost your senses?" James demanded. "2 babies in an Indian camp?" Only Eagle Eye remained silent, studying her face with an inscrutable expression. "Think about our situation," Sarah continued, the plan forming as she spoke. "If Eagle Eye leaves alone, he risks capture by Pierce's men. If he's found near your property, you face accusations of harboring an enemy. But if I go with him, voluntarily with my children, it becomes a different story." "A worse one," James objected. "They'll assume you've been taken captive, raise a hunting party that won't stop until they've found you." "Not if I leave a letter," Sarah countered, "explaining my choice. That I go of my own free will, seeking shelter with Eagle Eye's people until spring makes travel safer." Martha shook her head in disbelief. "No one would believe it. A white woman choosing to live among Comanche? They'd assume the letter was written under duress." "Then I'll make it convincing," Sarah insisted. "I'll explain about the wolves, the danger of traveling with infants in winter, the need to wait for safer conditions before attempting the journey east." She turned to Eagle Eye. "Your chief, Black Feather, you said he has dealt with white authorities before, that he seeks peaceful relations." Eagle Eye nodded cautiously. "He has treaties with some army commanders, trading agreements with certain posts." "Then it could work," Sarah pressed. "A temporary arrangement, presented as a matter of survival rather than preference. By spring, tensions might have eased. Pierce's men might have moved on to other concerns." James and Martha exchanged troubled glances, communicating in the wordless way of long-married couples. "It's madness," James concluded finally, "but I can't say I have a better solution. And I won't force a man who saved our neighbor's life to face Harlan Pierce's brand of justice." Martha wiped tears from her eyes. "Sarah, are you certain? The risk to you and the babies is less than the risk of staying and being discovered," Sarah finished firmly. "Eagle Eye knows this country, these conditions. He got us here safely. He can get us to his camp the same way." Throughout this exchange, Eagle Eye had remained silent. Now he spoke, addressing Sarah directly. "You would trust your children's lives to my people, after all the stories you have surely heard?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I trust you. You could have left us to die in that cabin. You could have abandoned us to the wolves. You didn't." She lifted her chin slightly. "Sometimes survival requires setting aside old fears and prejudices. Thomas would have understood that, even if he wouldn't have liked it." A long silence followed her declaration. Outside, the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon. Time was running short for decisions. "If we do this," James said, "finally, you'll need supplies, food, extra blankets for the children. And I'll write out medicines for the babies," Martha added, apparently resigning herself to the plan. "Willow bark tea for fever, chamomile for colic. You'll need to know treatments if they fall ill." Eagle Eye inclined his head respectfully. "To the Hendersons, your generosity will not be forgotten. When Comanche give their friendship, it is forever." As preparations began in earnest, James gathering supplies, Martha writing detailed instructions for infant care, Eagle Eye modifying. The travois for greater comfort. Sarah sat beside the fire, her sleeping twins cradled in her arms. The choice she had made terrified her in some ways, yet felt strangely right in others. Whatever awaited them in the Comanche winter camp, It represented something beyond mere survival. It offered a chance to truly live the frontier ideal that had brought Thomas west, not just to settle the land, but to become part of it, to understand it through eyes different from their own. "We leave at moonrise," Eagle-Eye told her quietly, pausing in his preparations. "The journey will take 3 days, if the weather holds." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over her. "We'll be ready." Outside, the last light of day painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and purple. A new chapter was about to begin, one that neither Sarah Mitchell of Philadelphia nor her husband had ever imagined, but one that might just ensure their children's survival in this beautiful, merciless land. Moonlight transformed the snow-covered landscape into an ethereal sea of silver and shadow as Sarah and Eagle-Eye slipped away from the Henderson homestead. The night was bitterly cold, but mercifully clear. Stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Their breath formed ghostly clouds that dissipated into the darkness. William Henderson, James's eldest son, had insisted on accompanying them to the edge of Willow Creek territory, where his knowledge of sentry positions might prove invaluable. The 14-year-old rode slightly ahead on his father's mare, scanning for any sign of Pierce's patrolman. "Mr. Pierce posted men at Miller's Crossing and along Rattlesnake Ridge," he whispered as they paused in a stand of cottonwoods. "But the old buffalo trail through Thunder Canyon should be clear. Nobody uses it in winter." Eagle-Eye nodded appreciatively. "You have a good tactical mind, young one." William flushed with pride at the compliment. "Pa says I notice things others miss." "Valuable skill," Eagle-Eye agreed. "Will serve you well." Sarah watched this exchange with mixed emotions. In the few hours they had spent preparing for departure, a surprising bond had formed between Eagle-Eye and the Henderson boy. William had absorbed Eagle-Eye's instructions on modifying the travois with rapt attention, asking intelligent questions about materials and techniques that revealed a genuine curiosity about Comanche ways. Now, as they prepared to part ways, Sarah saw reluctance in the boy's face. "Will you really bring Mrs. Mitchell back in spring?" he asked Eagle-Eye directly. "If that is her wish," Eagle-Eye replied solemnly. "My word is given." William seemed satisfied with this answer. He reached into his coat and withdrew a carefully wrapped package. "Ma said to give you this when we parted. It's a special tonic for the babies if they get colicky. And some of her dried cherries. Said they're good for a nursing mother's milk." Sarah accepted the gift with a lump in her throat. Martha Henderson had been stoic when they departed, offering practical advice rather than tearful farewells. But this final gesture revealed the depth of her concern. "Thank her for me," Sarah said, tucking the package securely among their supplies. "For everything." William nodded, then turned to Eagle-Eye. "Pa said to tell you something private. Said it's important." Eagle-Eye stepped closer, and William whispered something in his ear. The Comanche's expression remained unchanged, but he nodded gravely before clasping the boy's shoulder briefly. "Time to go," he said to Sarah. "Thunder Canyon lies 2 miles east. We should reach it before the moon sets." With final farewells to William, who would return to report their safe passage, they set off across the moonlit prairie. The modified travois now featured a small enclosed compartment where the twins slept, bundled against the cold. Eagle-Eye pulled it effortlessly through the snow, following game trails and wind-scoured ridges where travel proved easier. "What did James tell William to tell you?" Sarah asked when they were well away from the Henderson property. Eagle-Eye continued walking for several paces before answering. "Pierce discovered your husband's grave was disturbed, found moccasin prints nearby, believes Comanche desecrated it," Sarah gasped, instinctively glancing back toward her abandoned homestead, now miles behind them. "That's not possible. We left just after the burial, and you were alone, weren't you?" "I was scouting ahead of my hunting party," Eagle-Eye confirmed. We separated to cover more ground when the storm approached. But others of my people passed near your lands 3 days before I found you." The implication hung in the frigid air between them. If Comanche warriors had indeed disturbed Thomas's grave, for whatever reason, Pierce would never believe Sarah had willingly accompanied Eagle Eye. The search would be relentless. Henderson also said the territorial marshal has been summoned. "From Fort Kearny," Eagle Eye continued, "Pierce convincing authorities that the Comanche raiding party has moved into Nebraska territory." Sarah's mind raced with this new information. Their plan had just become significantly more dangerous. "Should we turn back?" Eagle Eye considered the question with appropriate gravity. "Decision remains yours. But going back now means the Henderson family faces questions about your disappearance, about Indian tracks near their home." He was right, Sarah realized. Returning would only endanger the Hendersons, who had already risked much to help them. The die was cast. They could only move forward and hope for the best. "How far to your winter camp?" 3 days' journey if the weather holds. South and west, following Beaver Creek to its source, then across plains to Republican River Valley. Eagle Eye studied the sky. Another storm building from the northwest. We must make good distance before it arrives. They traveled through the night, stopping only briefly to feed and change the twins. Emma and Daniel remained blessedly quiet, as if sensing the importance of silence. Just before dawn, they reached Thunder Canyon, a narrow ravine carved by an ancient waterway, its steep walls offering protection from both weather and searching eyes. "We rest here," Eagle Eye decided, finding a sheltered overhang where drifted snow had not reached. Few hours only. Dangerous to travel in daylight. Sarah was grateful for the respite. Despite her determination, the pace had been grueling after her recent childbirth. As Eagle Eye gathered dried brush for a small, nearly smokeless fire, she nursed the twins one at a time, marveling at their resilience. Neither showed any sign of illness or distress from the journey. "They have their father's constitution," she murmured, stroking Daniel's dark hair as he suckled contentedly. Eagle Eye arranged their bedding, thick buffalo robes provided by the Hendersons, in the most protected corner of their temporary shelter. "Sleep," he instructed. "I will watch." Too exhausted to argue, Sarah settled with the babies against her chest, pulling the warm furs around them. Despite her intention to remain awake, to share the watch, unconsciousness claimed her almost immediately. She woke to Eagle Eye's hand on her shoulder and the dying light of afternoon. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why. Then reality rushed back. Thomas's death, the blizzard, the Hendersons, their midnight flight. "Someone comes," Eagle Eye whispered, already dousing the fire's embers with snow. "Stay silent." Sarah gathered the twins closer, heart pounding, as she strained to hear what had alerted him. At first, there was nothing but the soft moan of wind through the canyon. Then she caught it, the distant jingle of metal, perhaps bridle bits or spurs. Eagle Eye moved to the edge of their shelter, blending into the shadows with an ease that spoke of lifelong practice. Minutes passed in tense silence. The sounds grew, louder, definitely riders approaching along the canyon floor. "How many?" Sarah mouthed when Eagle Eye glanced back at her. "3," he replied silently, holding up fingers. Moving slowly, searching. Pierce's men, almost certainly. Sarah's pulse raced. The twins chose that moment to stir, Daniel making the small, grunting noises that typically preceded crying. She quickly offered her finger to suckle, a temporary distraction she hoped would silence him. Eagle Eye retrieved his bow, nocking an arrow with fluid grace. The gesture sent a chill through Sarah, not fear of him, but fear of what might transpire. If they were discovered, violence seemed inevitable, bloodshed on all sides. The riders drew closer, their voices now audible though words remained indistinct. Sarah recognized Harlan Pierce's gravelly tones, giving orders to his companions. They were directly beneath the overhang now, invisible from Sarah's position, but dangerously close. "Tracks end here," one man called. Either they doubled back, or went up the canyon wall. "Check both sides," Pierce commanded. "Jenkins, ride up a quarter-mile, see if they cross the creek bed." The jingle of tack and creak of leather as riders separated. One horse remained, its rider presumably Pierce himself, almost directly below their hiding place. If he looked up at the right angle, Daniel began to fuss in earnest now, the finger no longer sufficient distraction. Emma, sensing her brother's discomfort, joined with her own soft whimpers. Sarah frantically tried to quiet them, rocking gently, offering her breast to Daniel. The noise of hooves on stone paused. "You hear that?" Pierce's voice carried clearly in the winter air. Sarah froze, heart hammering so loudly she was certain it must be audible. Eagle Eye remained perfectly still, arrow drawn, eyes fixed on the canyon edge where Pierce might appear. A long moment passed. Then Pierce's horse snorted and stamped, metal bits jingling. "Damn wind playing tricks," Pierce muttered. "Could have sworn I heard something." The twins, as if understanding the peril, had momentarily quieted. Sarah hardly dared breathe as the minutes stretched interminably. Finally, hoofbeats resumed as Pierce moved further down the canyon. "Nothing up here, Harlan," a distant voice called. "No way they could climb these walls with babies." "Keep looking!" Pierce shouted back, frustration evident in his tone. They didn't just vanish. The search continued for another hour, riders moving up and down the canyon, occasionally dismounting to examine tracks or potential hiding places. Sarah and Eagle Eye remained motionless throughout, the twins mercifully quiet after nursing. Dusk approached. Pierce finally called off the search. "Too dark to see the sign," he declared reluctantly. "We'll come back at first light with more men. They can't have gone far with infants in this cold." The riders departed, hoofbeats fading into the distance. Still, Eagle Eye maintained his vigilance for another half-hour before relaxing his bowstring. "They will return," he stated unnecessarily. "We must be far from here by then." Sarah nodded, legs cramped from holding the same position for so long. "How did they find our trail so quickly?" "Henderson boy was followed," Eagle Eye surmised. "Not his fault. Pierce is an experienced tracker." The realization sent fresh waves of concern through Sarah. Will William be in danger? Henderson is a respected settler. The boy claimed he was hunting, became lost, returned home. Pierce may suspect, but cannot prove otherwise. Sarah hoped he was right. The thought of bringing harm to the Henderson family plagued her as they hastily prepared to resume their journey. With night falling, they faced the difficult task of navigating the canyon in darkness, but remaining carried greater risk of discovery. "We will travel to the river tonight, Eagle," I decided, checking the twins' wrappings to ensure maximum warmth. "Cross before dawn. Pierce will not expect us to move so quickly with little ones." The night journey proved even more challenging than Sarah anticipated. The canyon bottom was treacherous with frozen streams and snow-covered boulders. Every step required careful placement. Every sound seemed magnified in the darkness. The moon, now waning, provided minimal illumination between drifting clouds. Eagle Eye moved with surprising confidence, finding paths Sarah would have missed entirely. Occasionally he would stop, head tilted as if listening to some distant message, carried on the wind before adjusting their course slightly. "How do you know which way to go?" Sarah asked during a brief rest, voicing the question that had puzzled her since their first journey together. Eagle Eye gestured toward the stars, visible through breaks in the clouds. "Sky guides us. Each star has a place, purpose, tells stories of direction." He pointed to subtle features in the landscape, a distinctive rock formation, a bent tree, the curve of a frozen stream. Land speaks to those who learn its language. Sarah considered this perspective with growing appreciation. Thomas had navigated by compass and the crude maps provided by land agents, tools of measurement and documentation. Eagle Eye's method seemed more intimate somehow, a relationship with the environment rather than mastery over it. Near midnight, they emerged from Thunder Canyon onto open prairie once more. The wind had intensified, carrying the promise of snow. Eagle Eye studied the northwestern horizon with concern. Storm approaches faster than expected. We must find shelter before it arrives. How far is the river? Too far to reach before the storm. He scanned their surroundings. There is a place, Old Buffalo Wallow, deepened by my people for ceremonial use. Good shelter in bad weather. Perhaps 2 hours' walk. The Buffalo Wallow proved to be a depression in the earth, about 12 feet in diameter and 4 feet deep. Its edges built up with stones and packed earth to create a more effective windbreak. At its center, a stone-lined pit held the ashes of previous fires. Many generations of my people have used this place, Eagle Eye explained, as he quickly gathered what sparse fuel could be found in the vicinity. Sacred ground where buffalo once came to roll in earth, cleanse their hides. Sarah helped as best she could, collecting dried grasses while keeping the twins secure in their carrier. By the time the first snowflakes began to fall, they had created a small enclosure using the travoy frame and buffalo hides stretched across the top of the depression. Inside this makeshift shelter, Eagle Eye started a fire in the ancient pit. The flames illuminated markings carved into some of the surrounding stones, spirals, handprints, stylized animals. Sarah traced one with her finger, wondering at its age and meaning. Who made these? Ancestors, Eagle Eye replied, feeding the fire carefully. Some from my people, some from before. Stories say first people left these marks to guide those who followed. The twins woke hungry as Sarah arranged their bedding near the fire. As she nursed them, the wind rose to a howl outside their shelter, driving snow into drifts that would soon cover all evidence of their passage. Pierce will lose our trail in this, she observed hopefully. Eagle Eye nodded. Storm is ally now, but also enemy if it lasts too long. We have food for 4 days, perhaps 5 with careful rationing. And after that, we hunt rabbit prairie chicken. He hesitated. May need to travel faster, covering more ground each day. The implication was clear. Harder travel might prove too difficult for the twins. Sarah pushed this worry aside, focusing on the present. They had survived thus far against considerable odds. They would continue to do so. As the storm intensified, they huddled closer to the fire, sharing warmth and the remaining food Martha Henderson had prepared: cornbread, dried apple slices, strips of salt pork. Eagle Eye supplemented this with pemmican from his own supplies, offering Sarah the unfamiliar but nourishing mixture of dried meat, berries, and tallow. Women of my tribe prepare this for long journeys, he explained. Gives strength, lasts many moons without spoiling. Sarah found the taste unusual but not unpleasant, especially given her increased hunger from nursing twins. Your women must work very hard to prepare enough for everyone. All work hard in different ways. Men hunt, protect, go to war when necessary. Women grow corn, prepare hides, raise children, keep knowledge of medicine. There was deep respect in his voice. Without women's wisdom, people would not survive. Chief may lead the hunting party, but his wife decides when the tribe moves the camp, where the lodge stands, how food stores are divided. This glimpse into Comanche social structure intrigued Sarah. The division of labor sounded similar in some ways to settler households, yet with important differences in authority and decision-making. Will your people accept us? She asked, voicing the concern that had lingered since they departed the Henderson farm. Eagle Eye added more fuel to the fire before answering. There will be questions, discussions among elders. He met her gaze directly. I can promise protection, food, shelter. Cannot promise easy acceptance. I understand, Sarah said, appreciating his honesty. We'll face that challenge when it comes. The fire popped and crackled in companionable silence. Outside, the storm had become a white fury, snow driven horizontally by relentless wind. Yet within their small shelter, a surprising comfort prevailed. The twins slept peacefully in their buffalo robe, tiny faces relaxed in the firelight. May I ask something personal? Sarah ventured after a while. Eagle Eye inclined his head in permission. You mentioned losing your son and wife to sickness. I'm sorry for intruding on your grief, but do you have other family members in your camp? Parents? Siblings? A shadow crossed his face briefly. My father was killed by Texas Rangers when I was young. Mother died 2 winters ago. Her heart stopped in her sleep. Sister lives with her husband, Dark Horse, who is scout for our chief. She has 2 daughters. The twins will have playmates then, Sarah observed with a small smile. Skyflower's girls are older, 7 and 9 winters. But yes, they will welcome little ones. Few babies survived the sickness that took my son. The personal details brought Eagle Eye's world into sharper focus for Sarah. Not an anonymous mass of feared others, but individuals with histories, relationships, losses and joys, just like the community she had left behind in Philadelphia. When we reach your camp, she asked carefully, what should I expect? What are your customs for guests? Eagle Eye seemed pleased by her interest. You will stay in my lodge first. My sister will help with the little ones, show you our ways. Chief Blackfeather will call the council to hear why I bring white women and children to winter camp. I will speak of finding you in a blizzard, of wolves, of danger to the Henderson family if you remained. And after the council decides, if they accept you as a guest, you will be given a lodge of your own, small but private. Food will be shared from common stores until spring. He poked the fire thoughtfully. You will be expected to contribute, as you are able, perhaps teaching our children your writing, or helping women with sewing. Your stitches on twins' blankets show skilled hands. The practical arrangement sounded manageable, even sensible. But Sarah knew cultural differences would extend far beyond these logistics. Will they expect me to become Comanche, to give up my own beliefs, customs? Eagle Eye shook his head. You come as a guest, not as a captive or one seeking to join a tribe. Your ways remain your own. A slight smile touched his lips. Though little ones may learn both worlds if they wish. The idea of her children bridging 2 vastly different cultures, finding value in each, perhaps someday helping others do the same, held unexpected appeal. Thomas had brought them west, seeking opportunity beyond Philadelphia's crowded streets. This was hardly the opportunity he had envisioned, yet it offered its own kind of frontier, one of understanding rather than conquest. As the night deepened and the storm continued its assault, Sarah found herself contemplating this strange journey that had brought her from a Philadelphia bookbinder's daughter to a widow in a buffalo wallow, sheltering with a Comanche warrior while blizzard winds howled overhead. Life's path rarely followed expected routes. Perhaps the true frontier was not the land itself, but the courage to step beyond familiar boundaries, geographical, cultural, personal, into unknown territory. Thomas had possessed that courage in leaving the city for the prairie. Now Sarah would need to find her own version, leading her children into a world neither she nor Thomas could have imagined. The twins stirred simultaneously, as they often did. Sarah gathered them close, wondering what stories they would someday tell of this extraordinary beginning to their lives. Would they remember anything of these days? Would they someday understand the choices she had made for their survival? Sleep Eagle Eye suggested, noting her exhaustion. "I will watch first, then wake you to take turn." Sarah nodded gratefully, settling onto the buffalo robe with Emma and Daniel nestled against her. Despite the storm's fury and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she felt a curious peace steal over her, the peace of having made a difficult decision and committed fully to its path. Tomorrow, they would continue their journey toward the Comanche winter camp. They would face new challenges, unexpected obstacles, but tonight, in this ancient shelter used by countless generations before them, they were safe, warm, and, most importantly, together. As sleep claimed her, Sarah's last waking, thought was a silent message to Thomas, wherever his spirit might reside. "We're finding our way, my love. Not the way we planned, but a way forward nonetheless." 3 months passed in the Comanche winter camp, a period of transformation for Sarah and her children that exceeded anything she could have imagined when she first glimpsed the circle of lodges on that frigid night in January. February had brought brutal storms that confined the entire camp to their lodges for days at a time. March arrived with temperamental shifts between winter's last gasps and spring's tentative beginnings. Now, April's warming winds carried promises of renewal across the plains. Sarah stood outside Skyflower's lodge, watching Emma and Daniel as they lay on a softly tanned buffalo hide in the early morning sunlight. At 3 months old, they had changed dramatically from the fragile newborns who had survived the perilous journey through blizzards and across frozen rivers. Their faces had filled out, revealing more of their distinct personalities. Daniel, serious and observant, tracked the movement of birds overhead with intense concentration. Emma, more animated and vocal, cooed and kicked with delight as Little Bird dangled a rabbit fur toy above her. The Comanche children had become the twins' devoted guardians, particularly Skyflower's granddaughters, who treated the infants as precious younger siblings rather than outsiders. Swift Deer had appointed herself Daniel's special protector, while Little Bird remained enchanted by Emma's blue eyes and increasingly frequent smiles. "They grow strong," observed a voice beside her. Sarah turned to find Eagle Eye approaching, returning from the morning hunting party with a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder. "They thrive here," Sarah agreed. "Better than I could have hoped." This was true beyond mere politeness. The collective caregiving approach of the Comanche women had eased Sarah's exhaustion significantly. Skyflower's herbal knowledge had resolved Emma's colic that had previously kept her crying through most nights. The twins' growth and development seemed to accelerate in this environment of constant, gentle attention from multiple caretakers. "Council meets again today," Eagle Eye informed her, his expression carefully neutral. "Blackfeather believes it is time to discuss spring plans." Sarah nodded, having anticipated this moment. The temporary arrangement that had saved their lives through winter would soon require decisions about the future. The council had initially granted them shelter for the winter months only, with the understanding that Sarah and the twins would depart when safer travel became possible. That time was approaching rapidly. Already scouts reported the southern trails were clearing, the rivers returning to normal flows after the spring melt. Pierce's search parties had eventually abandoned their hunt when winter deepened, but rumor suggested they would resume once conditions improved. "What will you tell them?" Sarah asked quietly. Eagle Eye considered his response carefully. "That depends on what you wish." Over the past months, their relationship had evolved from rescuer and rescued to something more complex. A partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility for the twins' welfare. Eagle Eye had become an unexpected constant in their lives, teaching Sarah the skills needed to survive in the camp while advocating for her acceptance among his people. Some in the tribe had been reluctant to welcome a white woman, viewing her presence as a potential threat to their security. Others, particularly those who had lost children to disease, had embraced the twins as a blessing, a sign of renewal. Sarah's willingness to learn Comanche ways, her quick acquisition of basic language skills, and her contributions to daily camp life had gradually earned respect, if not complete acceptance. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," Sarah admitted, trying to determine what's best for Emma and Daniel. She had considered all options available to her. She could return to the white settlements, face the questions and judgments that would inevitably follow her time among the Comanche. The Hendersons would welcome her back, she felt certain. Or she could request escort to a larger town, perhaps even arrange passage east to Philadelphia, where her parents might reluctantly take in their widowed daughter and grandchildren. Yet neither option felt right. The frontier settlements offered little opportunity for a widow with infant twins and no land claim. Philadelphia's rigid society would view her frontier experience, especially her time with the Comanche, with suspicion at best, open hostility at worst. "I would stay," she said finally, meeting Eagle Eye's gaze directly, "if the council permits it, not just until summer, but longer, perhaps until the twins are older, strong enough for more extensive travel." Something flickered across Eagle Eye's normally composed features, surprise certainly, but perhaps also satisfaction. "This is truly your wish." "It is. The twins are safe here, healthier than they've ever been. They're learning from both worlds, even at this young age." She glanced toward the children, where Swift Deer was now showing Daniel a butterfly that had landed nearby, explaining in mixed Comanche and English about its significance as a harbinger of spring. "The council will have questions," Eagle Eye warned. "Some will resist the idea of permanent residence." "I understand. I'm prepared to address their concerns, to offer more in return for our continued stay." Eagle Eye studied her face, seeing the determination that had become familiar over their months of acquaintance. "I will speak for you," he said simply. "For all three of you." That afternoon, while the council convened in the central lodge, Sarah waited with Skyflower and the children. The Comanche woman had become more than a hostess. She was now a mentor, confidant, and something approaching a friend, despite their limited shared vocabulary. Skyflower worked a piece of soft deerskin as they sat together, creating a new garment for Emma, who had outgrown her first Comanche-made dress. Her skilled fingers pushed a bone needle through the material, securing decorative beadwork in a pattern Sarah now recognized as protective symbols for children. "Council speak long time," Skyflower commented in her improving English. "Good sign. Quick decision, never good decision." Sarah nodded, focusing on her own project. Moccasins for Daniel, her stitches now nearly as even as those of the Comanche women after months of practice. "I hope they understand why we wish to stay." Skyflower set down her sewing, fixing Sarah with a penetrating gaze. "My brother speaks for you now in council, but the reason not clear to me. Why white woman choose the Comanche camp over her own people?" The directness was characteristic of Skyflower, who had never treated Sarah with the cautious distance some other tribe members maintained. Sarah appreciated the honesty, even when uncomfortable. "My own people. It's complicated." She began, searching for words that would bridge the cultural divide. "As a widow with no family nearby, no property, they would pity me, but offer little real help. My children would be seen as burdens, their futures limited by our circumstances." Skyflower nodded slowly, understanding the universal challenges of a woman alone. "Here they thrive," Sarah continued, glancing toward the twins, now napping peacefully on their shared pallet. "They have many who care for them, who teach them, who protect them. They eat well, sleep well, grow strong." "What mother wouldn't choose that for her children?" A subtle smile touched Skyflower's lips. "You learn to see with Comanche eyes. Good for survival." "I've learned from you," Sarah acknowledged. "All of you. Things I never would have understood otherwise." Their conversation paused as movement near the central lodge indicated the council meeting had concluded. Eagle Eye emerged, speaking briefly with Black Feather before making his way toward Skyflower's dwelling. His expression revealed nothing as he approached. Sarah rose to meet him, heart pounding with anticipation. "Walk with me," he requested, gesturing toward the stream that ran along the camp's eastern edge. Skyflower nodded encouragement, agreeing to watch over the still sleeping twins. They walked, in silence, until reaching a bend in the stream where budding cottonwoods provided privacy from the curious eyes that followed their progress through camp. Eagle Eye stopped, gazing across the water toward the distant hills, beginning to green with spring growth. "The council has concerns," he began without preamble. "Some fear your presence will draw soldiers or settler militia eventually. Others worry about the precedent. If one white person lives among us, others might seek the same." Sarah nodded, having anticipated these objections. "And what does Black Feather say?" "Our chief is pragmatic. He sees changing times ahead, more white settlers coming, buffalo herds shrinking, traditional ways threatened." Eagle Eye turned to face her directly. He believes there may be value in having someone who understands both worlds, who can interpret one to the other. Hope sparked within Sarah. "Then they'll allow us to stay, with conditions," Eagle Eye clarified. "You must become truly part of the tribe, not merely a guest. Learn our language fully, our customs, our spiritual practices, not just to observe, but to participate. The children must be raised as Comanche, though they may know their white heritage as well." The terms were more extensive than Sarah had expected, yet not unreasonable given the tribe's vulnerability. "And what role would I have here? How would I contribute?" "Black Feather suggests you teach our children the white man's writing and numbers. Many of our young ones will need such knowledge to survive in the changing world. In return, you will be given status as a member of my family, under my protection, but with growing independence as you prove yourself." Sarah absorbed these conditions thoughtfully. Teaching was something she could offer, drawing on her own education in Philadelphia. The other requirements, full cultural immersion, would be challenging but necessary for true acceptance. "There is one more condition," Eagle Eye added, his tone shifting subtly. "The council believes the twins need a father figure as they grow, someone to teach them hunting, riding, survival, especially the boy. Without this, they cannot truly become part of the tribe." Sarah's breath caught. The implication seemed clear, yet she needed to be certain. "What exactly does the council propose?" Eagle Eye met her gaze steadily. "They propose what I have already considered offering. A marriage between us following Comanche custom, not immediately, but after a proper period of courtship to determine compatibility." The suggestion wasn't entirely unexpected. Sarah had noticed the changing nature of their relationship, the way Eagle Eye had gradually shifted from protector to potential partner. Still, hearing it stated so plainly sent a flood of conflicting emotions through her. I need time to consider." She finally managed. "Of course, no decision is required today." He turned back toward the stream. "I should tell you that I spoke against this condition initially, argued that you should have freedom to choose your own path." "And what changed your mind?" A rare smile crossed his features. "I did not say my mind changed, only that I now present the council's decision." The subtle distinction spoke volumes. He was offering her a legitimate way to decline without rejecting the other conditions of remaining with the tribe. Sarah studied him in the dappled light beneath the cottonwoods. The man who had found her in a desperate situation, who had risked his own standing to bring her to his people, who had advocated consistently for her welfare and that of her children. She had come to value his quiet strength, his wisdom, his gentle interaction with the twins. In another time, another place, would she have recognized these qualities sooner? "If I agreed to a courtship period," she said carefully, "what would that entail in Comanche custom?" Eagle Eye seemed relieved by her willingness to discuss rather than dismiss the proposal. "We would spend prescribed time together learning each other's ways. You would join my family in seasonal activities, gathering, hunting, ceremonies. I would demonstrate my ability to provide, to protect, to teach your children. And if either of us decided it wasn't right, then no marriage would occur. You could remain with the tribe under Skyflower's sponsorship instead, though your position would be less defined." Sarah nodded, appreciating the clarity. "I accept the council's conditions, including the courtship period, but I have conditions of my own." Eagle Eye raised an eyebrow, waiting. "First, I must be allowed to maintain some traditions from my own culture, observing my faith, teaching the twins stories and songs I learned as a child. Second, if we eventually decide on marriage, we would raise the children together as partners, each contributing our knowledge and values. And third," she paused, gathering courage, "if spring brings renewed searches from Pierce or others, I need assurance that the tribe will protect the twins above all else, even if it means difficult decisions about my own safety." Eagle Eye considered her terms thoughtfully. The first two are reasonable and align with Blackfeather's vision of blending necessary knowledge from both worlds. The third, his expression grew solemn. "I would give my life before allowing harm to come to any of you. The tribe will protect all three of you as our own." The intensity of his declaration stirred something deep within Sarah, not just gratitude, but a recognition of the profound bond that had formed through their shared journey. Perhaps it wasn't the conventional foundation for a relationship that she'd been raised to expect, but it was solid, tested by adversity and proven genuine. "Then we have an agreement," she said, extending her hand in the white custom of sealing a deal. Eagle Eye looked at her offered hand, then slowly reached out his own, not to shake in the white manner, but to clasp her wrist in the Comanche way, signifying a deeper bond than mere business. Sarah instinctively mirrored the gesture, gripping his wrist firmly. "Agreement," he confirmed, a spark of something new in his dark eyes. They returned to Skyflower's lodge where the twins had awakened, their bright eyes following Swift Deer, as she demonstrated simple sign language. The Comanche girl had taken it upon herself to teach Daniel and Emma this universal plains language, insisting they would need it when old enough to interact with other tribes. News of the council's decision and Sarah's acceptance spread quickly through the camp. By evening, when the communal meal was shared around the central fire, Sarah noticed subtle shifts in how tribe members interacted with her. More direct conversations, inclusion in planning discussions, invitations to join skill-sharing circles that had previously been closed to her. As darkness fell and stars emerged above the camp, Blackfeather rose to address the gathering. Eagle Eye translated his formal announcement, confirming Sarah and the twins' conditional acceptance into the tribe. When he finished, the chief beckoned Sarah forward, presenting her with a symbolic gift, a beautifully crafted knife with a handle of polished elk antler, signifying both her status as a provider for her children and the tribe's expectation that she would contribute to communal welfare. Sarah accepted it with appropriate solemnity, having learned enough of Comanche protocol to understand the honor this represented. "Tell him I will strive to be worthy of this trust," she requested of Eagle Eye, who translated with evident pride. That night, after returning to Skyflower's lodge where they would continue to reside until more permanent arrangements were determined, Sarah sat beside the sleeping twins, watching their peaceful faces in the dying firelight. Daniel's features increasingly resembled Thomas's, the same determined chin, the same furrow of concentration even in sleep. Emma remained more a blend of both parents, her expressions animated in ways that reminded Sarah of her own mother. "What Would Thomas think of the path she had chosen? The question had haunted her throughout the winter months. He had brought them west, seeking opportunity, freedom from the constraints of city life, a chance to build something lasting for their children. The form that opportunity had taken was nothing he could have envisioned, yet the core purpose remained the same: securing the best possible future for their children in a changing world. Skyflower entered quietly, settling on her sleeping robes, across the fire. "You make a big decision today," she observed in the blended language they had developed. "Heart at peace?" Sarah considered the question honestly. "Yes," she replied finally. "Not what I expected when I left Philadelphia, but my heart knows it's right for now." The older woman nodded sagely. "Life is like river. Try to force direction, you drown. Learn to swim with current, find unexpected good places." The simple wisdom resonated deeply. Sarah had indeed been swimming with the current since that fateful night when Eagle Eye appeared at her cabin door, each decision a response to circumstances rather than a carefully plotted course. Yet those responses had led to this moment. Her children healthy and protected, herself growing in ways she never could have anticipated, new possibilities emerging from what had seemed utter catastrophe. Outside, spring winds carried scents of renewed earth and growing things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, language lessons with the tribal elders, preparations for the spring buffalo hunt, decisions about permanent living arrangements as the tribe prepared to leave their winter camp for summer hunting grounds. The courtship with Eagle Eye would begin formally with the next full moon, following traditions that predated any white presence on the plains. Sarah ran her finger gently along Emma's soft cheek, then Daniel's. "We're finding our way," she whispered, echoing the thought she'd had that night in the buffalo wallow. "Not the way we planned, but a good way nonetheless." The final embers in the fire pit shifted, sending a brief flare of light across the sleeping children. In that momentary illumination, Sarah glimpsed their future, not with the clarity of prophecy, but with the confidence of a mother who had found unexpected strength in herself and unexpected allies in a world she had been taught to fear. Whatever came next, whether permanent integration with the Comanche, eventual return to white society, or some unique path between worlds, she would face it with the same courage that had carried them through blizzards, wolves, and prejudice to this place of temporary peace. Beyond the lodge, nightbirds called to one another across the valley. Inside, 4 children of 2 different worlds slept in perfect harmony, their dreams untouched by the boundaries adults struggled to navigate. Their innocent acceptance of one another remained the truest measure of possibility on this frontier, not the conquest of land, but the expansion of human understanding across the artificial divides of race and culture. As Sarah finally surrendered to sleep, one certainty remained paramount. The widowed settler and her newborn twins, once abandoned to the mercy of a Nebraska blizzard, had found not just survival, but the promise of something richer, a life where difference became strength, where loss opened doors to unexpected connections, where courage created new definitions of home and family in the vast, unforgiving, beautiful wilderness of the American frontier. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.